Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rapping with the Rep. And this is another in the series of shows that we're directing toward the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic that's upon us, and really the ramifications of that. And we're here with our good friend Rick Parker, who is the president of the Chamber of Commerce, the Burlington Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our show, Rick.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
Rick's also a resident of Burlington and a town meeting member in Burlington. So we can talk a little bit about some of the ways that this crisis has affected Burlington specifically in a number of ways, but also the effect on Burlington is very similar to the effect on Bedford and Wilmington. So we can have a more general conversation. Just to sort of set the parameters, today the recording is being done on July 10th. So this is Friday, entering the weekend, and at this point Massachusetts has had about 105,000 total cases of COVID-19, and we've had 8,000 confirmed deaths. Most people realize that we've pretty much flattened the curve, which is the expression that we've been using. We've reduced the increase in the number of cases and the number of deaths, and in doing so we've gone down this path of reopening businesses and reopening recreational opportunities and other opportunities that we want to talk about for our residents and talk about sort of the context and the way that's happened. And so in the last 14 days, because that's important, where are we now? In the last 14 days, the state has had a 2.2% positive test result. So 2.2% of the people testing are now positive. Remember, that had been about 12% at one point when we were really increasing the incidence of the virus. Locally, Bedford currently has had, Bedford has had a total of 274 cases. And in the last 14 days, its positive test percentage is 1.63. In Burlington, Burlington has had 267 cases, so roughly about the same in the last 14 days. Their test percentage, though, is 0.56. In Wilmington, during that period of time, Wilmington has had 333 positive test results and a 1.88 positive test percentage. Where we are in the recovery now is that in flattening, we were at a point, the state has been at a point where we have been going down and down in the number of positive cases and the number of deaths. But then we started to return a little bit, and now we're at a point where there are gauges to this, and we were at a number that was less than one, a point such and such a thing. We're now at about a 1.0, so that means that of each person being infected, each positive case, we're just seeing sort of another one. So that one person may be infecting one person rather than three or more as it had once been. And that's important, because what that means is that when we're looking at the reopening plan that the governor has set forth, that we're looking to see, okay, how is the virus responding to this plan? Are we continuing to go down, in which case we should be reopening more things? It's working out. But look at the hospitalizations and look at the prevalence of the virus growing, to make sure that we're not going too fast, because if we're going too fast, we may have to take a step back. With respect to our plan to reopen, and just to set that parameter so everybody's on the same page, back in March, the governor declared a state of emergency as a result of this pandemic. What that means under our Constitution is that the governor now has increased authority to make decisions that the governor otherwise could never have made. So the governor at that point could and did close down our schools for the rest of the school year. He could and did close down non-essential businesses. And he then has authority to create a plan to reopen the schools at some point and bring back those businesses and other opportunities like for recreation and for weddings and things like that. And the governor came out with a 4-stage plan. He called, at first, the phase 1 was stay at home. He went to the cautious phase, and now we're in what's called the vigilant phase, which we'll be in for a while. Hopefully we won't go back to phase 2, but hopefully we stay into phase 3, because phase 4 is the new normal plan, which is really comes into effect when we're getting close to seeing a vaccine or a treatment. um, with respect to our reentry into phase 3, and then we've seen he's also broken down these phases and open things a little at a time within those phases. But restaurants were recently allowed to open for limited indoor dining, casinos and arenas, small arenas that is, on a limited basis, movie theaters on a limited basis. And this doesn't mean that all movie theaters or arenas took advantage of the opportunity to reopen. Many didn't, because it's very difficult. The restrictions on opening for businesses is intentionally very difficult, because the governor wants to make sure that if an opportunity opens, it opens very, very gradually. So museums are allowed to open with restrictions, and outdoor gatherings such as weddings are allowed to open. There are such restrictions on weddings that they're not the type of weddings that we normally see, because there's no dancing and things like that. But you can have an outdoor gathering and have a celebration that with distancing you can enjoy with other people. Youth sports, largely non-competitive youth sports, is allowed to open. So you can have practices and things like that. But when it comes to things like football or hockey or soccer, where kids are in contact, you have non-contact sports. But the things that involve contact are very difficult to open. And we know that professional sports are coming back without crowds. So we're getting there. Slowly we're getting there. And I know that was a kind of a lot to start with. But Rick, I do want to turn to you, because you're hearing from the residents and the businesses about how they're taking to all of this. You also, I know, live in a household where you have a teacher. The reopening of schools is under a lot of discussion, and DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, is coming out with guidelines, but there are two sides to these concerns. And we both are married to school teachers, people who teach in schools, and so that's a concern. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Just tell me what you're seeing and what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Ken. And I can call you Ken, Mr. Representative.
Of course.
First of all, I want to start with the silver lining in all of this, and it's hard to look at it in this perspective, is that Massachusetts was one of the states that was hit earliest. And the advantage of that is people know that this is a serious, serious issue. And the concept of we are all in this together, while it brings that esprit de corps, we're going to pull things together, it means that those that agree and disagree with us, we are all in this together. So if there's one message that I can get across, please adhere to the guidelines that are being asked of you with the state's regulations. It's important for businesses. It's important for us to move forward and not take this lightly. The worst thing that could happen to us is to take that step back, because once that step back happens, people lose that ability to look forward and say, hey, we will come out of this, and a step back is tough. Now, you did ask a bunch of questions all there at once. I have a mother that lives with us. She's in her mid-80s. So do I feel that I have a certain additional responsibility? I mean, I have the same responsibility that everyone has. Mine I can see every day, and the real the factor here that's affected businesses, it's affected us as people, is that this is something that we can't see. And some people feel like until it hits them, they won't believe it. But I can assure you, this is real. And the governor is a data-driven governor, and one from the healthcare industry, and he has set the limits on what he would say for the health indicators before we're able to go to the next step or before we go backwards. So those are the rules. So we're seeing, I think, for everyone from a personal perspective has been affected dramatically. Businesses certainly have been hit hard, and those in the local area where we have kind of a tale of two worlds, where there's the tech sector, which initially the work from home was a bit of a nuisance for everybody, but it offered, an opportunity to keep working. And quite honestly, a lot of people have adapted that quite well. We don't have that, the gridlock on the highways that we once had. And so I think there's a positive there. But the impact to small business, to those in the hospitality, retail, restaurant industry, it's been devastating.
It has been. Rick, can I just go back to one thing you said, because I think it's important to point this out, and you really are an example of a lot of the ways in which people have had to handle this, because you have a daughter living at home who's in the healthcare industry, right? And as you said, your mother is in her mid 80s living at home. And so you hear a lot of conversation about young people and whether young people are susceptible to this disease, and maybe the young people ought to be the ones out there working. I see that a lot. A lot of our constituents that have talked to me about that a lot. But your young person, your daughter, comes home with your mother, and wherever your daughter has been, essentially, if your daughter didn't take precautions, you could say your mother has been. That's an example of how important this is, that we all are in this together.
Yeah, and we're learning more about this virus, that we could be carrying it for a number of days before we feel any symptoms, or we may feel no symptoms at all. So there's people out there now that are advocating we need, more testing. We need to test everybody before they come to work. Well, keep in mind, if they have a negative test, it may be 4 days before it becomes positive, but the test is only as good as it is in that one moment. I think you've seen the NBA right now is having that same issue. When people come in 2 days, they have to quarantine themselves, and then they have to be tested for 2 days to get past that 4 day. But again, you can do everything possible in your own life. We rely on everyone else to be doing the same thing until we find a vaccine. So it is critical. We have young people, while they may be less susceptible to the effects of the disease, they are just as capable of being contagious and passing it to other people. So we take that step in our household, but we also take it in wherever we go. And I don't like wearing a mask any more than anyone, although there are people that would prefer that I do wear a mask after this is over. And we'll leave the dancing at the weddings out. I think there's people that would like to do that for a while for me as well. But it's aside from being able to be tested, to have the antibodies and giving plasma, that's the number one thing you can do. The next thing, make sure you protect yourself and everyone else around you until we get the vaccine. And that's just the right thing to do, but it's critical in the business community. And for us in this area, it depends on this economic vitality. It's going to affect us in more ways than one if we don't adhere to these guidelines. So please, anyone who's listening to this, take them seriously, take the precautions, wear the mask until we get to that day when we can say it's behind us.
I've been really impressed with the businesses in Burlington and Bedford and Wilmington. Those that I've seen have worn the mask. The employees I haven't seen in our district really any instances where I go into a retail store or a place like that, and I am confronted with people not wearing the mask. And I think that sends a message to the consumers coming in that this is expected of you. And so there's maybe less enforcement, less conversation that has to go around, where this is our culture. We understand that we're sacrificing a little bit of our comfort for the greater good. And I've been impressed with that. Is that what you've seen from the business?
Yes. I mean, I certainly can't speak for Wilmington or Bedford, but we do have members that are in both those towns as well. When I can speak to the restaurant community, we first got together and said, hey, we saw that in phase 2 restaurants, we're going to be allowed to do outdoor dining. And even through the takeout and delivery section, we got together and said, this is what the governor has said is going to be the guidelines. Whether or not you personally believe in it does not matter. You have to adhere to it. And I was really impressed when everyone was echoing that sentiment, and even to a higher level. This is the future of our industry. And you could have 99% of the people doing everything right, and it's that 1%. If you remember, this started, depending on what you believe, it started with a very small number of people, or maybe even one. So it only takes one to have it go, rampant again. It's so important. But I've got to say the businesses have been totally on board, not only as individuals and understanding it, but understanding they are part of a much bigger thing. And the collective data is what's going to drive the opening and or the stop and going backwards.
It's an interesting position that the businesses are in. Look at the supermarkets when they're enforcing the capacity, of people, and they're enforcing the lines to get in. They realize that might be to their own detriment as a business, but they do it, and they do it with a good attitude. I haven't really seen anyone that's not pleasant when you get to sort of the front of the line. The workers that there have been very pleasant in managing the situation.
Yeah, I think we certainly in this area of the country have the experience of what happens during blizzards. And aside from everybody going out and buying eggs, milk, and bread, even if they use it or don't use it, once it gets past that initial stage, people do kind of pull together and they see the bigger picture. When this one initially started, even though people were being limited on the amount of maybe meats that they could buy in supermarkets, somehow toilet paper was in major demand, that people were going to be eating less but needing more toilet paper. I really haven't figured out that data and how that works out. But once the initial shock settles down a little bit, and we're certainly not out of the woods, people do want to work together. And I can say from the business community, normally where we have businesses that would say, hey, the government's being too tight on us, everyone understands that we truly require each and every one of us to be on board here to collectively move forward. I couldn't be more proud of the businesses in the area in not only complying, but asking what they can do to help make things better for those that maybe don't have it quite as well.
Often we talk about, and not to compare the sacrifices, but our police and firefighters keep us, they go toward danger, they keep us safe. They're willing to put on a uniform that they need to protect themselves and sometimes others. To protect themselves so they can protect others. They do that. It's very uncomfortable, but they do it. And now we're being asked to put on a mask to protect others. And so I think most of us feel that, it's a sacrifice I'm willing to do. It's sort of, it's not that much to ask compared with what others have been asked to do now and throughout our history for the benefit of all of us.
Yeah, it's been nice to see. If you remember when we first started this, the news, you would see the hospitals. You'd see the hospitals day after day after day, and that was the main focus. Now there's still, there are still people in the hospitals. The numbers have dropped dramatically, but it hasn't gone away. I think people are driven by what they're seeing. They have more time now to spend, maybe watching TV. And we're seeing what happens when people don't take it seriously in other areas of the country. And, this doesn't have barriers on state lines, town lines, even country lines. So I'm hoping that, short of getting that vaccine out now, that people can start to understand that we can all do our part and really come together. I know politics at the national level have been very divisive, and I don't care which side of the fence you're on there. Things like this there can be some good stories when people come together, and I think we've seen it certainly behind the scenes and continue to see it. There's a lot of good happening, and we just need people to stay vigilant. If you need to get that mask off, go in your backyard and get a couple of breaths of fresh air, or find a place where you're not around people. We will get through this, and the sooner that we can all get on board, the better it's going to be for all of us.
So this is an issue. We've talked now about how we are all in this together, but many people are frustrated that they can't get back to the lives they had. In the business community and employees who have lost their jobs, it's not easy for them. And in our office, we get emails, interesting sometimes from both sides of an issue. Some people in the community who say, youth sports, get them back. I want my kids to be able to get back onto the Little League field, push for that. And then I'll get an email that very same day saying, protect my child from the pressures of having to get out there, because understand that that's a health risk out there. Schools are so, it's so complex. We get just as many people saying we're not ready to reopen the schools in September, putting kids into a classroom, putting our teachers at risk all day long, working with our kids without more in play. And then we get a lot of emails saying we got to reopen the schools. Do you see the same thing on both your business community hat and your town meeting hat?
I think we both know somebody who always talks about how things are interrelated. The school systems and childcare are critical to people's ability to work, where they're going to work. Again, in that when we're talking on that topic, going backwards will be a killer for us. If we decide, hey, yeah, we think it's right, send all the kids back to school, and the infection rate goes up dramatically and we have to shut it back down. Think of those businesses that then brought people back to work, got them, back in the office, and now they have to send them back home. Not only does it add that added disruption, but the psyche of us as individuals is just that letdown feeling of, oh my God, this is never going to end. And, doing it slowly out of all people. Businesses, we like to know predictability. We want to go forward. We want to be able to serve our clients and our customers. We want to get back to business as usual because it's not about, that corporate dividend. This is about lives. It's about jobs. And the people in the hospitality industry, these are people. These are people who live on being around other people and serving them and getting to see people. They've been devastated. And the people that they work with who are now home and not able to have jobs, they want to do their part to move it forward. So I do think the schools and childcare are so critical to determining how we go forward. And we can't afford to make a mistake there.
Right. And it's so complex because it may be that we've got to have some remote learning remain so that we can spread kids out in the school buildings. It may be that we have to look at other buildings in our community, other municipal buildings or similar type of buildings to bring classes so that we have more space to teach. Getting creative that way.
Yes,
you're right. That is a focus.
It's going to be a very difficult and complex problem. But I think, certainly here in the Commonwealth in this area, we have a way of working out problems. But if you look at schools, my wife's a kindergarten teacher. The challenges for kindergarten students are much different than challenges for high school students. If you can imagine, having 20 or so 4 and 5-year-olds trying to keep masks on, keep them away from each other, and keep in mind that they all go back to households afterwards. So there's going to be some serious challenges, and only time will tell how fast that's going to happen. But it's a very complex problem, and it is all interrelated, especially when it relates to those families that have children and require them to be taken care of during the day, and hopefully not be contagious and spreading the virus further.
We here in our area, we're the focus, the central point of a lot of the life sciences that are working hard to develop vaccines and develop treatments for this COVID-19 in the first place. And I know that you work very closely with many of these businesses. What are you hearing? Do they have needs that are unmet, or are they able to go about their business and in their research? Do they have access to the employees they have always?
I think when you look at companies that are in research and labs and life science, those are businesses that are well set up for physical distancing, for protection. PPE is commonplace in all of these. This is business as usual for most of them. Certainly the pressures to come up with a solution are enormous, not only for us locally, but, for the world, to be quite honest. I think there's been sharing of information between companies that wouldn't normally happen otherwise, cooperation and collaboration that it may have been directly between competitors before. And this thought of we are all in this together has been able to bridge some of the gaps there. But I would say as far as life sciences, their day-to-day activities have not changed as much as typically some of the other industries. Those required to be in large office buildings and certainly hospitality, retail. These things have been affected dramatically. Life sciences will be the one that leads us out of this.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think so too. With respect to hospitality and specifically the restaurants, and I know that you work very closely with our restaurants in this area, and we have been able to open to outdoor dining and to a smaller extent indoor dining. What's the reception been? Have you talked to them about, are people coming back, or are they continuing to rely on takeout?
I think it's mixed, Ken. If you take a cross section of let's just say you take you and your 4 neighbors and you were to do a straw poll and say who's comfortable in going indoors to restaurants now, who's comfortable going outdoors, who was going to maintain a takeout and curbside delivery. It's pretty much across the spectrum of what people are doing. Indoor is certainly starting out much slower than outdoor was. I think people were much more open to go to outdoor dining. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, we are weather dependent, and we've been very fortunate lately. I mean, it's getting hot and sticky, but the rain has stayed away, and it's made it easier for these places. But it's starting slow with the indoor. And to be honest, I think the restaurants are somewhat happy in that, because if they were to have a flood of people coming in, it would present some challenges that would cause them to take a look at it. This is a very resilient industry. These are people, and I don't know if you've ever read any of Anthony Bourdain's thing. He said everything he ever learned in through university and training, he learned much more from the people there. These are resilient people. They work hard, and they understand the interpersonal relationships of humans. So they're very cautious, but they're some of the greatest people I've ever met, and really understand that it's all about the client. It's about the customer, not only delivering them a great meal and great service, but making sure that they leave in better shape than they were when they came in. They take it very seriously.
Is that industry, or what industry has taken up most of your time, most of the stress that you, I know, carry, because you carry the stress of the businesses? What is it that's troubled you the most about
there's been several phases of it. Certainly restaurants and hospitality have been a lot of it. Initially, Ken, when things were completely shut down, it was the small business owners. It was the mom and pops, those that needed some financial assistance. And when the CARES package came out, initially with the PPP, it was just the unknown. How do I apply for it? I got locked out of it. What happened? Some of these larger companies got it and I didn't get it. These are people who generally are very self-sufficient, and most of them type A personalities, and been able to run a business, start from scratch, and maybe for the first time in their existence needed outside help. As a small business owner myself previously, I know that you try to solve all your problems yourself, but getting people the financial assistance, getting them assistance with DUA, and just a quick shout out to your staff. Your staff has been incredible in directly helping some of these businesses and their employees get through the process and get the answers that they were looking for. So thank you to you and to Cody and Sarah. Then once that initial process was done, it was really focusing on an ability to keep the pressure off the supermarkets that was happening initially, to get takeout and delivery as a supplemental source of basic food items. I mean, it's easy to forget what those first few days were like when supermarkets were empty of things. People were afraid to go out to supermarkets, especially, people that were elderly, were afraid to go to a supermarket. If they did, they didn't want to, be in contact with other people. So I think having takeout and delivery and curbside was critical to keep pressure off the supermarkets. But the focus with the restaurants has been, was a key part I would say that the beginning and the secondary part. Now that the governor has outlined what exactly the plans were, and in the beginning, there were not a lot of answers coming out because, quite frankly, none of us were ready for this. And the governor's office as well, they had challenges. Now that we have a better roadmap of what that is, our real challenge that we have now is with hospitality and hotels being able to open again, and that's something that's going to take a while before we're going to allow indoor meetings of more than 25. And some of the hotels locally, that's their bread and butter with some of these larger companies. The travel industry, and I'd be remiss if we didn't mention the mall.
Yeah.
The retail industry, they were under siege before this with the online services, and those of us that have been the last holdouts of not doing online services. I think there were some people that had no other choice, and they've seen how easy it is. I want to remind everyone that ease comes with a price. This is not a knock on Amazon or any of the products and things that they're doing. But when you go to a local place when you invest in a local retailer, and you can do it, online with curbside pickup with most of our local retailers. The money that stays there employs local people. It stays locally. It helps, when eventually when we get back to youth sports, these are the companies that are supporting, your kids. So I would say to continue to try to support retail, but it's a long haul here. Retail is going to change dramatically, and we're trying to support them. There's not a lot of people that are comfortable going out, but you can still buy from a lot of local retailers and have it, delivered to you at home, or curbside pickup, it's always nice to get out in the car and listen to the radio a little bit and feel the air and do a curbside pickup totally safe.
My example of why that is so important, and I think you know it, and I put this on social media back on Thanksgiving. The day before Thanksgiving, my stove broke. We had a house full of family coming over, and the local Doyen's, the local appliance store where I had shopped before, I called them up and they made an arrangement for me to pick up a new stovetop, the kind that could be immediately installed. And we were able to do that. They found something in the basement that absolutely worked for me. Amazon couldn't have done that. And if I only had relationships with Amazon, that wouldn't matter. I'm an anonymous account with Amazon, but I was able to work that out. And locally, when we go to True North and we see Paula Salvucci and her staff there, the smiles that you get because they know our local, the local clientele. It's an entirely different feeling than anything that you'd get online. And we're there for each other. Go back to we're in this together. I know that the concept of teamwork is very important to you. I think behind you, we're looking at a rock bridge where if you take any one of those rocks, the thing tumbles, right? And so you really stand for, and the Burlington Area Chamber of Commerce and the community that you're in stands for that. We all are in this. It's easier if we were in this together. We exchange our best ideas and we disagree sometimes, but it's easier if in the end we realize that we're trying to do our best for each other.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest examples I've seen of that, and the business community, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, there were a number of businesses that when this initially started reached out. These are people who are used to being very busy, and all of a sudden they were not. And I cannot be more proud of some of the businesses reached out and said, hey, are there people out there that that are hurting? How can we help? How can we get food to some people that may need food? How can we get supplies to people that may not be able to have supplies? Without mentioning any names, are there people that are afraid to go out and get toilet paper? Can we get it to people? So I was incredibly moved by some of the things that happened behind the scenes. But one of the greatest things I saw was our own town meeting. There was a feeling there, and kudos to Paul Sagarino for setting the stage. We were able to have town meeting outdoors on varsity field with all of the physical distancing requirements. But he led off the meeting saying, we're in unprecedented times. The town has done a very good job being conservative with their spending and having some rainy day funds. Well, the rainy day is here. And we've asked people to push back on requests, and they've done so. But the discussions that went on were limited because they were allowed to do them in advance with the question and answers. It's hard to express in an environment where there's a lot of, I won't say animosity, but friendly taking sides in different issues and debates. The ability for people to put aside their own personal agenda and do what was right for the town and moving forward and getting a budget approved so that we can continue to operate here. It was incredible. And it happened, in 3 hours. And I can say that I remember that night. It wasn't that long ago, and it was cool, but things moved quickly. And I was really proud of our town and Paul Sagarino and his team and Amy Warfield for putting it all together, and Bill Byer moderating. Phenomenal job.
Yeah, and I was going to say Bill Byer moderating that for the night, keeping it going did a great job. In Bedford, town meeting will be tomorrow, Saturday the 11th, and I think it'll start just as a storm finishes up, so we'll be right behind it. And I expect it to go similar to how you described, because here in this community, we do work together to get through these issues. These are tough times, and our economy is in tough shape. Our municipal budgets are in tough shape, as you just said. Paul Sagarino went through that. And Sarah Stanton here in Bedford is expressing the same frustration. But we'll see, and I expect that the residents will respond, in like fashion. Well, Rick Parker, Burlington Area Chamber of Commerce, thank you so much for stopping by here on Rapping with the Rep. It's been a fascinating conversation, and thank you. So you add so much to it. Everybody, looking forward to seeing you the next time here on Rapping with the Rep. Tune in then. Goodbye for now.